Hey there, I'm Stu Rich, Facilities Industry Lead at Cartograph, and this is Facilities Management Minutes, a series where we dedicate time to sharing all things facilities management with you by interviewing experienced and innovative thought leaders from the industry. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Deke Smith, global expert in building information modeling data standards and business practices. Deke has a ton of experience ranging from Deputy CIO of the Army Research Lab to working with Building Smart International on their BIM standards. Deke's vision, patience, and persistence has helped to establish a strong foundation of many of the information standards and business processes we use today. If you are working in the facilities management industry and find value in these interviews, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our channel to be notified when we publish future episodes. Know of a thought leader you'd like to see featured in this series? Comment below or reach out to us at marketing@cartograph.com. All right, let's get to our chat with Deke. So Deke, thanks very much for being part of this interview series. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and I'm grateful for your willingness to share your perspective with us. I think all of us gain our perspectives from our life experience, and I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit of your career, because I think that shapes your perspective and your opinions on a lot of issues.
Well, it does. I appreciate that, Stu, and thank you so much for inviting me. I really I was looking forward to it also. I started out as working for the Department of Defense, and with Naval Facilities Engineering Command, actually in Norfolk, Virginia. And then I went from there to work for the Smith Group for a while in their value management division. And so we were working on lifecycle costing and value engineering and things like that. So that kind of did it. And I guess I should also say, while I was at NAVFAC in Atlantic Division, I started writing the cost engineering program for the Navy. And that was kind of just a fluke. Boss asked if anybody knew how to do programming. And I said, well, yeah, I'd taken a course in college. So that was my qualification back then. That's all you needed to do. If you could say computer, you were in. So I learned a lot from that. And then actually when I went to the Smith Group, it was we were writing a program, estimating program called STEC with a guy named Mike Della Sola. I don't know if you've run across him before, but. So we did that for a while, and then we were doing these value engineering studies, 40-hour workshops every week, and I had a brand new family, and I thought, okay, being gone every week and being home on weekends wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I asked NAVFAC if they'd take me back, and they took me back at headquarters because I'd moved up to Washington now. And so I worked there for actually a total of 30 years with DoD. Most of it, 22 of them, were with NAVFAC. And then I went to Army Research Lab with a friend, Dr. Radhakrishnan, and I moved. It was actually we had finished up the National CAD standard, and I moved to. I was getting frustrated at how slow CAD was being implemented, and so Dr. Radha said, "Hey, come up here. We're going to do some real." We're going to change the organization substantially. And so I said, okay. And I went to work for Army Research as the Deputy CIO. So I kind of jumped out of my whole architecture environment and everything and moved into that. Did that for, actually we had a 5-year plan that we finished in 3. And so after that, I decided, okay, that was kind of cool. And it was one of the best experiences I had in my whole career. So I said, well, if we did that for Army Research, maybe we can do it at a higher level. So I moved to Office of Secretary of Defense, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment. And so now we're managing 570,000 assets and over 100,000 pieces of software. And of course, when I was at when I was the Deputy CIO, we were trying to make sure that our software didn't get identified at a DoD level, because that meant a lot of extra paperwork. And then when I worked at OSD, it was how do you get all the gather up all the software that people were trying to hide. So I knew they were hiding them. So it was, and that was really a good experience too. Again, kind of working at the other end of the spectrum. Because at ARL we were working at the installation level on each building, and we were doing major updates to their operating system. And why they wanted an architect there was because they wanted to increase the uptime on their computers, and they found that most of the downtime was related to facilities issues. When we got there, the idea of a redundant cable was two cables buried in the same ditch. Well, you can take them both out with a backhoe. So, and the other thing that happened there was that we did a TCO study with Gartner, and so that was an IT TCO study, but that gave me a real good understanding of what TCO was all about, total cost of ownership was all about. So again, that kind of was a good background as to what we got into. Pretty much the whole time that I was with DoD, the 30 years that I was with DoD, I was also volunteering with the National Institute of Building Sciences. And that's where, like I say, we started out with the CCB, Construction Criteria Base, and the whole building design guide, developing those. And then we moved into the National CAD standard, the National BIM standard. And so that was, again, some real good experience. And that's really where we started the whole process of working with the international community. And it was back then, it was the International Alliance for Interoperability, and an IAI in North America. And then we had a group at NIBS called the Facility Information Council, and we kind of merged that together and became Building Smart Alliance. And so when I was with Building Smart Alliance, I was also working on, there was an ISO standard that we were working on. It was related to the CAD standard, actually. I was on the board of Building Smart International for about 10 years, actually. One of the big things that's been really interesting has been the Building Smart Awards program that I've been involved in every year. And been really one of the people that kind of I reviewed every project, and so I got a real good chance of understanding what the heck was going on internationally. And in a lot of cases, some of those international things are they're ahead of us in some areas. And I think partially, you look at the European Union, and they have standards that they have to adhere to. That they do have to adhere to ISO standards. In the United States, it's kind of a suggestion. And they also don't rely on just one piece of software. They have been integrating a lot of pieces of software for a long time, and that's where they really understand the need for open standards and being able to share information. And that's what it's all about is about information. There's data providers who are creating the information, the authoritative sources, and people that are accepting those information. I should also mention that while I was with DoD, I was also the thread lead for the Business Enterprise Architecture, the BEA, which was putting together an architecture for the entire Department of Defense. There were 5 threads. There was personnel, there was acquisition, there was financial, and procurement, and installations and environment. And that was $1 billion. When I was working on it for the first 2 years, we spent $1 billion on architecture, IT architecture. So now I'm not only a facility architect, I'm also an IT architect. And which again helped a lot in understanding how all this goes together. The problem we have in the construction industry is that we don't have that $1 billion purse to go out and develop the overall architecture. That's really what we need. We need to be able to identify who the authoritative sources are for the information and who are all those people that need that information. And once you connect all that together, and we go through the business processes and doing some of those kind of things, which is good. but it's typically not well enough defined to be able to actually then develop software from and things like that, which is what we were doing, of course, with DoD. So that's a little bit how I've gotten to where I am, I guess. Answer
Well,
a few more questions.
you've had your finger in a lot of different pies over the years.
That's the thing. Working with also some folks at CSI, Construction Specification Institute, Greg Seaton primarily, who was developer of Uniformat, and actually Uniformat came from Brian Bowen back in earlier days, and actually we worked with him originally when Uniformat was getting started. But master format certainly came from CSI, and that's developed into OmniClass and all the tables that are involved there. And that's where Greg Seaton was. His major was library science, so he really understood how classification systems worked and all that, which I learned a lot from that too. So I was involved in those. I was involved in how I got into the National CAD standard was actually from working. I was on the AIA layering committee with Mike Schlock, who headed that up, and there were 5 of us working on that. So that kind of led into, pulling AIA and CSI and NIBS and Corps of Engineers, because we're still involved certainly with them since I worked for DoD, and that kind of was the nucleus of the National CAD standard.
The facilities life cycle has often been described as design, build, and operate, where operate takes up about 80% of the total cost of ownership. Can you talk us a little bit about the different information needs in each phase of the life cycle and how they relate to each other?
Early on, when you're doing budget estimating or budgeting or coming up with an idea for a planning and budgeting, you're using more of a kind of a systems approach, and your estimating, of course, is going to be either historical or square foot and things like that, and that's going to be pretty not all that accurate, as it turns out. Very rarely does the final product cost what you planned it to cost. And then you get into design. Now you're starting to put a little more intelligence to things, and you're collecting and using design kind of information. You're writing specifications and things like that, and saying, this is the stress I need of the concrete, or there's the steel and all those kind of things, and you're developing specifications, and then that's what gets then turned over to the contractor to go out and actually select the specific products and the model numbers and the serial number, what gets actually installed. So they're collecting information also, or they should be collecting information anyway. Also, let's put it this way: information is available to them, and I think this is the key that we really have to do overall in the industry. Is I'm convinced that almost every piece of information now is available electronically at some point in time in its life. It's up to us to capture that and make that information, keep that information in a usable format. And then ultimately, there's the commissioning, which can use a lot of that information that was developed during construction, and commissioning then leads to handover to the owner. To be able to then operate, maintain, and renew and things like that their facilities. And I think that you've got multiple classes, I guess you could say, of facility owners. You've got some that do a facility every 20 years or 50 years or something like that, and they have very little corporate knowledge that they retain from one facility to the next. Probably a whole new set of people and things like that. Then you've got people with large portfolios that do have corporate knowledge, and universities and hospitals and those kind of, they're kind of a different class, if you will. And so they do have staff that that have to deal with it all along. I think then, the thing is the handover from all that design information that was, that somebody works out all this, the details for the structural analysis and all those kind of things, it's not necessarily needed on a day-to-day basis, certainly for operating and maintaining the facility, but there are a lot of things, like if you're going to replace an HVAC system, you really kind of need to know what the design specs were, how many CFM, what kind of,
Yep.
all the details. And so at some point in time, you might need to dig back into that information, but on a daily basis, you really, you don't need a lot of that information. So that the operation, the maintenance side kind of gets, pared down quite a bit from all the data that was originally collected. And I think that's a challenge that we sometimes have. And very often what happens is very little information gets passed to the owner. So the operations folks have to go out and regather the information, which to me is like, gosh, come on, guys. We got to do better than that. Because it usually takes a year or so, by the time you collect that data, and your warranties are gone by then. And the warranty, a company that's going to respond to a warranty it wants to see, what maintenance did you do on it? What repairs have you done and things like that, in order to say that, yes, in fact, you maintained it according to specs. If you don't have that information, then they can say, hey, well, the warranty's void because you didn't maintain it. And you had to, you had to grease it, you had to oil it or whatever. You had to replace this belt or replace the filters and those kind of things. Now, what you really need to be able to do is connect all these pieces, all this cost information together, and for this facility. So it's not only your first cost that you went out and gathered, but it's also, how much money are you spending on maintenance and operations and things like that. But that money is coming from a different, different source typically. And I think that's the part that we have a problem with, is everybody's got their own set of their own budget. And that goes back to, being able to get people that understand this whole process, because if you make, and I have a chart that I've used several times, that I developed with Mark Bew over in the UK. And what it talks about is, that the amount of money we spend on design is minuscule compared to the amount of money we spend on construction, which is minuscule compared to the amount of money we spend on operations, which is minuscule to the amount of money we spend on, on maintenance. And then that is, that's minuscule to the owner who's occupying that facility and paying all the salaries of the people and things like that. And that could be minuscule to the benefit, the societal benefit. What's the societal benefit of a new hospital?
Right.
It's huge. And it's all based on, somebody, this little tiny decision that somebody made during design could have a huge impact on the operating cost. Well, first of all, construction, but then operating cost, and then the maintenance cost, and how often you have to renew the facility and things like that, replace things. My wife asked one time, how long does a house last? And I said, it'll last pretty much as long as you maintain it. And that's true for every facility. And you look at some of these, some of these facilities that have been out there. When some of the building smart trips that we took, we went out and looked at Olympic facilities, since we're kind of in that phase right now. And some of these beautiful facilities, nobody was using, and they were just overgrown with grass, and it was really sad to see. So I think the countries that have gone in and said, we're going to use these facilities for other things later on. I was over in Japan not too long ago, and back in '64 was when they Kenzo Tonga designed that, and beautiful facility, and like I say, they were building all the new facilities and the new aquatic center and things like that. But we walked over to see the old facility, the old swimming facility from the '64 Olympics, and it was still being used and very active, and it was, they were maintaining it, and it looked great, and that's where you see a lot of European and Asian countries, do look at things a lot, that they're going to last a lot longer. I remember being in Paris one time. We went to a restaurant that had been a restaurant since like 400 something. I mean, it was like, whoa. Obviously, they've renewed it a few times. I mean, in the United States, it's kind of like if it's a 100-year-old facility, it's kind of getting old, and we just have a little bit different view of things. So I think it's not bad to have a little broader view and see where things are going to go. And certainly we have it. I mean, you look at federal facilities, and you look at, a lot of colleges and universities have facilities that have been around for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of they all need renewal. And some things, obviously heating and ventilating needs to be renewed a lot faster or more often than structural system. But structural systems do need to be renewed too.
Right.
I know I was out at University of Washington. They were, looking at how to upgrade some facilities for seismic, and they were, including that in their renewal projects. And so, so those are the kind of things that do have to happen.
You've spent a lot of your career around standards, and I expect that standards, the real hope for standards is to be able to ensure more reliable, more consistent information to all the stakeholders in the process. Talk to us a little bit about the development of the National CAD standard and then the National BIM standard, and
Sure.
how were they different? What did you learn from the CAD standard that was then applied to the BIM standard process?
Well, I think, like I say, the CAD standard was actually the easier one, although I didn't think so at the time because it was the first one. But we had most of the parts there. Like I say, it was the CAD layering guidelines that AIA had put together. And that was, just, and then Corps of Engineers brought in color and line weights and things like that to that, which actually, helps when you're putting together a set of drawings to make sure that everybody understands, because that's the big thing. If people don't understand the drawings, you get change orders. And so, the more you can standardize on some of those things. And I think, some people, they'll say, well, we'll develop our own office standard. It's certainly a lot easier to go out and use a standard that exists than to, develop your own. And then the thing is, if you're trying to develop something and work, I mean, you're not doing this alone. You're having other either engineering firms or you're having other partners that are working on these things. And you've got to be able to understand what all of those, what everybody is coming up with and what they're developing, and having everything ultimately come together and integrate together. CSI brought in things like the omni-class tables and the classifications and things like that, brought in symbols, things, again, that had kind of been being used. And so, an example, master format, we needed everybody to use master format. And uniformat too. You've got the international standards are kind of the high level standards, and then you've got national standards, and you've got company standards, and there are certainly at every level there's a logic for having those, and I think the international standards are often very broad and a little more vague, and so it's then the next step down is, okay, how are you going to implement that in your country? Is often the thing that needs to be looked at, and that's where you get into like NCS and even the other. I guess the other thing I should mention back on NCS is that one of the things that after we finished NCS, then we went back and talked to all the major vendors and said, "Will this work for you?" Having this standard, and there were a few little tweaks that we had to do. By the time, that they say, well, that concept isn't going to work for us as well, but if you switch it to this, we can do it. And we said, check back with the others and said, okay, yeah, that'll work for us too. And I think that's the other big thing is you've got to have all these different vendors are, can work to the same standard. If you don't have that, then that's a problem. And I think that's where you get into, with Building Smart International and the IFC standard and stuff like that, being an ISO standard, everybody can develop to it. Whether it's the greatest standard since sliced bread, is debatable. And they are going through some major updates to the IFC right now, which look very promising, and I think will help quite a bit in the development or software side of the issue. So even for all the different items that are included in a project, different products and things like that, they're standards, so that things fit. Things tie together all right, and so I think that's a big piece of it too. Now, where the National BIM standard was substantially different from the National CAD standard was that BIM was and is still very much under development, and it's also quite a bit more expansive. CAD was pretty much oriented towards the production of drawings, so that you had design and construction. That was the improving the communication between those two phases, whereas BIM is really all the way across the life cycle. John Messner, in the development of the BIM execution guide, developed first 25 use cases. When are different times that you use BIM? In Building Smart International, we expanded that to 50, primarily picking up a lot of things in the operations side of things and maintenance and more of the operations side of things, I guess, and also in procurement. There hadn't been much in the way of procurement in the original 25. So I just got off a call this morning on use case management. Where we're continuing to expand that, and I'm on another committee that's relooking at the 50 use cases, and most of those are holding together. They may have a little bit different terminology, but and there's a couple new ones that we've identified. But and going back, and one of the things in 2018, 2019, we asked a lot of detailed questions on the Building Smart Awards. And we got the submissions. We required the submitters to identify which use cases they were using, and in 2019 we actually had examples of all 50 use cases, which was to me a great step forward. That because for a long time I had a real concern that BIM was going to end up being visualization and clash detection. And that was going to be the extent of it. But now we've got all the engineering disciplines involved. We've got, like say, procurement. We've got all the operations kind of things, and maintenance, and even wayfinding and things like that. So it's the whole picture now. Will that expand? Probably. And I think that's one of the things that we're looking at now is, you've got all these different countries that are involved in Building Smart International. I think there's 22 chapters or something like that now, and that represents even more countries. And everybody has a little bit different way of doing things, and so but how do we coordinate that so we don't have thousands of use cases? Because the other concept there is that if you have thousands of use cases, you end up nobody has software vendors are going to want to sell these tools that they develop, and if you've got a very small group of people that are going to buy a use case, you're not going to be able to put much money into developing because you're not going to get the revenue stream. And that's kind of where I use the Bill Gates concept of software development. You develop Word that you can write a letter or a text or a book, with the same tool. So everybody can use it. And it's the same thing for all the tools that they have in the Office suite. And in the grand scheme of things, that's kind of what's required. I remember even back with the National CAD standard, had a meeting one time with Carol Bartz, and I said, hey, can you incorporate NCS into the Autodesk products and AutoCAD, and she said, "What's the advantage to us?" And that was I remembered that, because that's really, ultimately we all have to work together on this. And you can have a great idea, and if nobody can monetize it, it's not probably going to go very far. So you've got to be able to in fact, that was one of the things my boss at Army Research told me. He said, "Don't ever come to me and say you don't have enough money for a project, because all that does is tells me that you didn't do a good enough job selling it." So that kind of, and I happen to actually be fairly successful in getting projects through there because I understood that concept. And so, like I say, with the national BIM standard, we're still trying to feel our way as to how that can be best developed to be able to support the most people. When we did version 1, we started out with version 1, part 1, and said, okay, how do we develop a use case, information delivery manual, and model view definition, things like that. And we identified that, and we went through a process. And part 2 was going to be the people coming back with the examples of how they were going to develop these different use cases, or identify these different use cases. Part 2 never happened because we kind of get to, it was a lot slower process than we thought it was going to be. And so we moved on to version 2 and 3, and now they're working on version 4. So, and this new version is going to be like, a whole different, they're trying to take a little different view of it, different approach, and make sure that, we're at least kind of also meeting the industry's needs as far as what's required in doing all of it. So it'll be interesting to see how it all does come together. I like I say, I'm on a couple of the committees, and I'm sitting there saying, well, I'm sure glad I'm not having to plan it this time. But it's interesting to participate on it, certainly, and see where it all goes.
I've spent most of my career on the software side of the house.
Sure.
And I think there's often a perception from software vendors that standards bodies are kind of slow and ponderous and constraining to what our individual product vision might be as a software developer. Is it your view that the standards bodies can or should be move more quickly, or is it kind of just the definition of the problem that you're trying to solve, and the need to reconcile all these different perspectives in the process?
I think, that's a very good question. But I think what standards kind of do is they kind of build layers, and if you go way back in time, somebody came up with, the binary system. Okay. And so that was kind of everything was based on binary, and then everything was based on hexadecimal, and you kind of crept up through the whole process, so I think now where we're talking about trying to get all this information to integrate and talk to each other, there's going to have to be some standards to do that. So it's kind of, you build that one layer and everybody's kind of jumps on that, and then you build the next layer and everybody jumps on that. So with international standards, and you get the different countries involved, it gets sometimes watered down, because every country kind of needs their own piece of it, and they can't all agree. And so the standard is, okay, these are the things that we can agree on, and we could probably just come along with as great a list of things we don't agree on yet. But maybe in the next version we'll agree on those. And I think the other thing that happens with standards is, you put a standard out there, and first out of the block, nobody's using the standard. Mm-hmm. It's a standard, but nobody's using it. And then what ends up, and that's ISO, required. Most standards require that, they be renewed like every 5 years. And you kind of see, okay, just how much of that standard has become standard. And again, so it's constant building process. But I do think it's a necessary process, and it's like I said, it's a necessary evil that you've kind of got to go through. It takes about at least 10 to 15 years to get a new standard implemented. And so it's not for the faint of heart, obviously. You got to have some stick-to-itiveness here. But it's, if you and I came up with the best idea in the world today, on how to move this whole thing forward, we'd have to convince other people that it was the best idea in the world. And then we'd have to get people to, ultimately invest in developing some software, and how long did that take? And then we'd have to have people to, implement that software, buy it and implement it. And so it just takes a long time to go through any of these. But if you don't, it's not a good situation either. So it's a necessary evil. Yeah.
It's interesting, all the challenges notwithstanding, it would appear that there are different regions of the world that have been more effective at incorporating a standards-based approach than others. Why is that, do you suppose? And specifically, why is it that the United States seems to lag so consistently?
Well, I think, like I say, a lot of, in the European Union has their set of standards, and they are mandated to use those standards. So I think that helps a little bit in that area. And certainly we've seen some countries that have done better implementing some of these things. But again, it comes out as ISO standards that people are adopting. In the United States, ISO is often a suggestion and not necessarily something that there's nothing that forces you to use an ISO standard. And so I think that's part of the problem. I go back on these awards that the submissions, and I can't talk about this year obviously because we're in the middle of evaluating, but one of the ones that really got me a couple of years ago was the wharf project in Brisbane. It's a mega project, and you've got hundreds of designers and contractors and everybody working together, and they've got hundreds of models that they have to coordinate every week. And it's like, whoa, and if you don't have the standards and everybody working from the same sheet of music there, something like that can't happen. And you've got some of these projects that are these mega projects and stuff that are just hugely successful at integrating hundreds of people that really, and they're all using open standards. They're all using these building smart standards, and so then I've heard people in the United States say, well, the IFC doesn't work. I say, well, I can show you quite a few projects where actually it works very well. And so but I think the other side of that is, it's really up to a lot of very smart people to figure out how to make it work. And it's you're almost on your own a little bit still in getting to understand how to make it all work. And I think that's a challenge, and that goes back to the whole thing with education and training and things like that. And of course, the difference between education and training is learning how to use a piece of software. As I've gone through my career, I started out with WordStar, and then I went to Multimate, and then I went to WordPerfect, and then I went to Word, things like that. And so, but so there was some training involved in learning each of those different pieces of software. It was the education that I got that taught me how to write. Okay. And so, and taught me how to learn and things like that. So I could go out and, doesn't matter which piece of software I'm using, I use the software that, is the best for the purpose. And so I think that's where we have to get, education move along a little better. and a little more coordinated. And I think that's one of the big things too. Is the UK moved ahead pretty quickly in CAD, or not in CAD, in BIM, excuse me, because the government required it. You know, and in the United States right now, the government is essentially, well, it was the Transportation Research Board, and it got some language got put into some legislation that said that you had to use 3D modeling for bridges and infrastructure, highways and things like that. So now Federal Highways is actually implementing IFC on all their new projects and AASHTO and things like that. You know, there's a whole big effort going on in moving in that direction. So there are pockets that are, you know, moving along more quickly, again, because they have some, some push. I think that was another thing going back to the National CAD Standard. We got all of the agencies to put policy in place to require the National CAD Standard. And what happened there too was that, I know from when I was working at Atlantic Division, we worked with some 400 different architecture and engineering firms. And so if we required them to use the National CAD Standard, that's 400 firms that are using the National CAD Standard for their government projects. Well, they also do private sector projects. And why retool to do, to do business with the private sector? Hey, we'll use the layering and we'll use the, all the symbols and things like that we're using in these other projects. And so that gets it feeds it out into the whole industry much faster. And that's what we were hoping was going to happen with the National BIM Standard. I can't say that it really has quite yet because, again, it's very much more dynamic and still developing. I think the industry, one of the biggest problems the industry has is that we're very focused on each practitioner has his area of responsibility, and there's not a lot of broad thinking. We don't do life cycle well. Everybody's got their own budget. Everybody's got their own area that they work in, and so there's no cross pollination, if you will, there. And I think that's one of the things that we need to try to do is understand how those costs, how those decisions that are made early in the process, affect the rest of the life cycle. And a lot of times what happens is that, a decision is made in first cost or in design and construction, and nobody really considers what it's going to take to maintain and operate it. And it could be, a very small change could make it a whole lot easier to maintain things. And there's a lot of examples of that, of how, it's one example I really liked that Brigida Foster one time told about is if you're doing a rooftop unit and air conditioning unit, you look at these plans and drawings, and they have a lot of single line drawings showing where the electrical connections are supposed to connect, what circuit it's supposed to connect into, and what the piping is supposed to be, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, you get out into the field and you have a little space that you're going to put all this piping and all this wiring and everything else. And the heavy thing out there is the pump. And so you put the pump down in there first, and then you start wiring it and putting all the pipes in and all this kind of stuff and connect it all, and everything works, The only thing that has to be maintained in there probably is the pump. So you got to be able to haul all that out of there to be able to, grease the pump. And so had you put the pump, in an accessible place, the guy coming out to do the maintenance wouldn't take 4 hours to do it. It'd take him 10 minutes. And you do that every month or whatever, for the life of the facility, 50 years or whatever, that's a lot of time.
So that sounds like a great example of total cost of ownership in action. You mentioned total cost of ownership earlier in our conversation. Describe kind of at a high level the overall concept, and then take us down a few more levels into how the concept can be applied and measured.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and that's, just as it says, it's total cost. Um, and I think, we have things, we've been doing things like, there's first cost, obviously, everybody does first cost, you figure out how much it costs to buy something. And you do that for your house, you do it for buildings and everything else. Um, the, the next piece that really is, what is it going to cost to operate it? And I think the one of the, we see a lot of stuff with life cycle costing, okay, and life cycle costing, typically you might be making a decision as far as buying one piece of equipment versus another piece of equipment, and it might be that this one is a better quality and so it's going to last longer and you don't have to replace it as often and things like that. Good example there that everybody's kind of picked up on is LED lighting. Incandescents are cheap, but you have to replace them every couple of years. And, compact fluorescent was, okay, the next step better, but it also had a lot of problems. Don't break one and things like that. And then you get to LED that has to replace once every 25 years. And the cost of, screwing in the light bulb can really be significant if that light bulb is in a ceiling 40 feet in the air. Yeah, and so those are the kind of it's not the cost of the product; it's the cost of getting installed. So you're making decisions like that with life cycle costing. You may be looking at the cost of operating and things like that. But what total cost does is it kind of expands that whole thing, and ideally looking at the whole facility, and it's looking at. Do I put in a really high tech security system or heating and ventilating system, and I don't have the training for the people that are going to maintain it. And this is one of the things that they're running into. There's a group called I2SL, which is Labs for the 21st Century, and they're finding they're building buildings that they're turning over to whether it's universities or other organizations, and they don't have anybody to manage them. They don't understand how to manage them. We had a building out in Port Hueneme with the Navy that they built originally, and it sold energy back to the grid. And this was years ago. And over time, it wasn't selling as much energy back to the grid, and then eventually it was actually consuming energy. And they went and tried to, did some forensics to figure out what the heck was happening. Come to find out that it was a very sophisticated system, and that it was a training facility and had a lot of conference rooms or classrooms and things like that. And they were set up, they were monitoring how much carbon dioxide was in the air. So as the carbon dioxide levels went up, and rooms being occupied, they'd bring in more outside air. So initially there wasn't a lot of outside air coming in, and so your heating and cooling of that was much less. But as the carbon dioxide went up, you brought in more, and so the energy costs went up a little bit. What they found was that the maintenance guys didn't really understand this, so they wired the dampers open. So now they were bringing in 100% outside air the whole time. And it was using a lot more energy than was expected. So those, and so the training they didn't know how to replace the solenoids or whatever to, get the dampers to work properly. So they just wired them open. And so, how do you get and it could have been for multiple reasons. It could have been from lack of training. It could have been a lack of budget. We're not going to buy any more of those stupid solenoids. We're having to replace them all the time anyway, and so, there's all kinds of different reasons. But again, it's because different people are making these decisions that aren't necessarily in line with the whole process. How did we get to this? That we need this. This is important to make this work the way it's supposed to work. And I think that's those are the kind of issues that, like I say, and it's training, and it's having spare parts and all these kind of things. What kind of things are you going to need on hand, and what kind of maintenance? Again, going back to one of the earlier things we were talking about, what kind of maintenance is required to not only keep the warranty in place, but also so that you don't have premature failure of the different parts that are in the building. So those are the kind of things, again, looking at kind of a big picture, and having things like reserve studies, understanding what kind of reserves you need to have in place in your budget, so that there's always emergencies that are going to come up. But I guarantee, that you're going to have to replace a roof every 20, 25 years or something like that. You're going to have to replace all these different parts on a pretty standard schedule. It should be no surprise. But to a lot of like homeowners and owners of facilities that are like one-off kind of facilities, churches and things like that, it always becomes a surprise that they have to replace the roof, or they have to replace the hot water heater, or they have to replace whatever. Our homeowners association, and I say this is extremely scalable concept also. Our homeowners association, I manage the pool, and the budget for that every year. I know what my budget is for the pool for the next 25 years. I know that I have to white coat every 5 years. I know that I have to do major rebuilds of the walls and things like that every 20 years. And what happened, why we kind of got into having a reserve study and everything in place, was because the first time we had to go in and replace the walls, we had purposely kept the dues low. We had not saved any money. And so we had to go out with a special assessment. We had to go out and take out a loan, and nobody was happy with that. Okay. And so then the next time we had the reserve study in place, we knew how much money we needed to collect in dues every year. And if a homeowner came and said, how come I'm paying so much money in dues? We could show them exactly what our budget was going to be for the next 25 years and why we were saving this money up. And we had a chart that showed, what the amount of money that we had in the reserve and the amount of money we were going to need and things like that. So we came, and I've been doing this for 38 years now. So I've got a little history on this too. And so now you can see that we know that this is going to come up. We know that we have to replace this much concrete deck. We know we have to do all these different things. And I can go through and tell anybody what it is. And when the board does the budget every year, it's extremely easy to do the budget, because I come in and say, this is what I need, and this is what the reserve study says I'm probably going to have to replace, and so this is what my budget is, and they approve it, and we approve a dues increase based on the CPI, Consumer Price Index, every year, and so we have the money. And so when we had to do the maintenance the next time, we even added a handicap ramp. And nobody batted an eye, because we were well within budget, and we knew what we were doing, and everybody really appreciates the fact that it's well managed, and so I think that's the way that it should be for every facility, and you get large portfolio holders like colleges and universities. Doug Christensen, who we worked with in putting together the total cost of ownership standard through APA. They were the ones that initiated it. Doug had done that for Brigham Young University, to the point where the board of directors wouldn't approve a new building until they had a TCO study in place. So they would know whether or not they had the resources and staff and things like that, and budget to be able to maintain this new facility. If they didn't, they could hire new staff, or they could go out and take a building offline, decommission a building, and sell it off to somebody else, or something might need it or whatever. But they didn't. They recognized that they only had a limited number of dollars and resources, and so it made it a very sustainable environment at the university. And every year when they went through and did their budget, they could say, this is what we had identified the last previous year, and this is what we're gonna this is what we're gonna need for this year, and this is how we spent monies last year, and everybody was very visible, very open, and people could really understand what was involved. So it worked extremely well. And so now we figure out, okay, how do we get other people to kind of implement that same concept? So that's the goal is there, and I think that like I said, it's very scalable, and it's something that this, again, going back to my history, the IT industry has been doing total cost of ownership studies for quite a while. And this company Gartner has really they've got a huge database of how much how much it costs to be able to do these different things, and so that's kind of the model I think that we should probably adopt in the construction industry also. So there's a model out there, and so there's a little risk. We just have to find somebody that wants to move forward with that concept. But I think it's the same problem we have with BIM. It's the same problem, and I should go back on BIM, and because another model that I think we should look at is COBE, Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. A really good concept that, again, follows the life cycle. You capture information off a submittals registry, and then you capture additional information as you go through construction, where you pick up, what model or what brand and what model number were actually installed, even down to the serial number, and you collect all this information so that you can actually hand it over to the owner on day one of the operation of the facility, and they have all this information to be able to operate their facility. So I think there are some really good models out there that we can implement that do understand and take into account this whole total life cycle. I think the other thing, one of the things I've been working on recently on total life cycle cost, or total cost of operations, is really understanding how do you collect all the cost information about a facility. It's not just, like say, not just those first costs, but you're predicting what it's going to cost you in energy and things like that, and then as you're now owning it and operating it and paying bills out of your budget and all, associate that with the building too. And so now you're tying your accounting system into this model, this cost model that you've put together for this particular facility, and you want to just go ahead and continue expanding that, and like I say, any cost that gets that should be associated with that asset actually gets tied to it, and that's really kind of the whole picture of what total cost of ownership is all about. That you really, in fact, know what it is going into that facility, and of course, again, the large portfolio holders are going to be the ones that benefit the most, because they're going to have another building, might not be exactly the same, but what they've learned from a previous facility they can apply to the next facility, and so it's a whole learning process too, and lessons learned and things like that, and say, okay, well, in order to replace the tubes on this boiler that we put in, in this building, they didn't realize they were going to have to replace the tubes in the boiler every X number of years. And the only way you can pull those tubes is by taking out this concrete wall. There are facilities like that, because nobody thought about, the fact that you were going to have to maintain this thing. And so you've got to tear down a concrete masonry unit wall or whatever, and in order to be able to gain access to to replace the tubes. And so you've got, all kinds of things like that, and all kinds of examples like that out there. Where people have gone through incredibly heroic measures to try to maintain their facility. If somebody had thought about it up front, it wouldn't have had required that. So yeah, and those are all costs. Those are all additional costs that didn't have, in a lot of cases, didn't have to happen. But if you're looking at the total picture, you're going to see that, okay, I do have to do this maintenance task every X number of years. And the thing is that you can also look at is, can I put a better product, better quality product in so I don't have to do that as often? But if you're in like retail or something like that, okay, your structure is not going to change, but the inside you're going to want to change every, say, 5 years anyway, because to update it and make it look fresh and good from a marketing point of view. So in that case, you don't want something that's going to last 100 years. You want something that's going to last for 5 or maybe 7 or something like that, so it doesn't look too bad when you tear it out. But those are all the decisions that you need to really be able to make. And then the other big piece, I guess, of TCO is, what is it going to cost at end of life? We've dealt a lot of, and I'm sure everybody listening to this is, had to deal with like asbestos removal at some point in time, hugely expensive, and okay, we didn't necessarily know all the ramifications of that up front, but there are a lot of other products out there now that we are more sensitive to that, as what are different carcinogens and things like that are out in that you don't want to use in your building. And so, and like I say, in order to deconstruct whatever you're going to do with that building at the end of life, what costs are going to be associated there too. Is it something that you can actually sell? There's a lot of deconstruction going on in the world now too, because there's recognizing that it takes energy to make new products, and if you can go ahead and reuse products that already exist, you're way ahead. But there's a cost in that too. So you got to be able to just see that big picture. And I think the other thing is, we've got to recognize that it's not going to be something that we just it happens overnight. It fits in with all the other things that we're thinking about, about sustainability and environment and all these different things. So they're what is the cost of these different products? Not necessarily just on that one facility, but what is the cost on society of these different approaches? And now you're seeing a lot of multi-story, high-rise wood construction and things like that getting into place because it's more sustainable and it doesn't have some of the side effects of creating steel or concrete and some of those kind of things. One other thing that kind of I think is a missing piece that I'd like to just include in this is the concept of metadata. Metadata is one of my pet peeves, I guess, if you could say. And I think why I bring it up is because we're talking about information and information flowing through a whole process, and in order for the information to flow, you've got to have trust in that information. There's a lot of things we do in day-to-day life, in daily life that you trust that information and you don't go out and have to necessarily verify it. You may do a verified at some level and at some point in time, but you're trusting whoever is providing that information for a large part. And I think that's one of the pieces that's missing in the construction industry is very often we redo something because we don't trust the information. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that kind of goes along with that too is the that authoritative source that originally creates that information. They also have an understanding of what the sensitivity of that information is. Now, obviously, working in the Department of Defense and things like that, so I can tell you that it actually works. Is you can move top secret information around. There's things you have to do to it to protect that, encryption and things like that. And there's really some interesting ways we encrypt things, but you can do that. But at the same time, private sector, a hospital. My roommate from college used to work at Johns Hopkins, and he said, there's a lot of information in a hospital we don't want the public to know about. We don't want to know where the gas cutoffs are, where the vivatorium is, where the lab test animals are, and all those kind of things. And so that's that's sensitive information. And the only person that can really identify the sensitivity of the information is the authoritative source. And so they have to be able to pass that along too. At the same time, you're protecting this information. And we've certainly, the big issues now, with cybersecurity and all this kind of stuff, people are getting a little better understanding of, you can't use your password as being password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not good situation. So, I don't know how many people are actually to the point of, high level protection on their passwords. But, when I was with DoD, we had to change our password every 90 days. So I told them that, I had to retire because I didn't have any more passwords. I couldn't think of any more passwords. And, in some facilities, we had to change the combinations on every month and stuff like that. And I tell you, trying to keep track of that, and you can't write anything down, is not the easiest thing to do. So, there are tools that will help you do some of that. But cybersecurity is getting to be a big issue now too, and so you've got to protect that. And I think that, like I say, that kind of lends into the whole thing with metadata and trusting the information, because if I put something in there, I want to make sure that I know who has modified it, and I can do that by protecting. I did a talk for Karen Kensick out at USC. On BIM BOP she has every year, and it was about having your information, owning your information, but sharing it. There are ways to certainly do that today, and know that where that the source of that information and who created it and stuff like that. So you have that so that you can protect your intellectual property, but at the same time you can also be able to get it to other people. And I think that's, the other piece of this too is that you want to, some people like say some information gets shared with other people, and some information, a lot of information has multiple levels. Like you don't want it publicly known, but you do want the first responders to be able to know what it is when they they come to put out the fire. And I can remember we were sitting around with Patrick McClamey at HOK one day, and we were sitting out in the courtyard in their Washington office, and the fire trucks roll up, and they're geez, what's happening, and so we're sitting there, we're having an outdoor meeting, and so we were just sitting there, and pretty little while later the fire, and it had been like 5-10 minutes or something like that. The fireman walks over and said, "Do you know where the fire control room is in this building?" Yeah, that would probably be, if it actually had been a fire, it was false alarm evidently, but had it been an actual fire, not sure that they would, 10 minutes to figure out where the fire control room was. So, those are the kind of things that, practical, kind of things that just happen every day that you need to have some information about information. And that's what, of course, metadata is data about data. So I think that's kind of another piece that we have to make sure is included in all this. And that's, I guess the other piece of that too is that with cybersecurity, you can't design security into a system after the fact. You really have to do it from day one. And so I think that, and I know in talking to some of the software vendors, they've embedded security or metadata into their software. Nobody's asking for it, so they don't turn it on, which is kind of, I thought, interesting too. So I think we need to ask for it.
So it sounds to me like total cost of ownership in an ideal world anyway isn't just a series of TCO studies at the beginning of the design process, but it's a more holistic, yes, maybe even ideally a continuous process, yes, where in each investment in a facility, we're trying to contemplate the overall implications over the very long term, which maybe is what differentiates TCO, is the investment horizon that we're considering with any activity. do I have that right? Should we be thinking
Absolutely,
of
and you
this
can
as a
start.
kind of a continuous improvement kind of process?
Absolutely, and that's the thing too, which follows along with that. You can start anytime.
Hmm.
You can start anytime. It doesn't. You don't have to start at the planning phase. You can start. How much money am I spending today? I mean, I've got a list, and I don't know how many other people do this. I have a list of how much money I've spent on my house, and when I think it's going to have to be replaced. So I would think also that when I go around to sell the house, number one, I've got the basis of what I spent on it, but number two, it's also valuable information for somebody that's buying and saying, okay, I just replaced the water heater last year. You're not going to have to worry about that for another 8-9 years. And the same thing with the roof or the air conditioning or whatever. And so that's like a very simple step. And that's the other piece too, is I think that I see BIM as being as because BIM is very or should be information. That's what the I in BIM is information, and sometimes that's missed. but the a BIM generates a lot of information that TCO needs. So that's where there's a link between those two. And of course, the other thing is that I think that TCO is going to also be the metrics that we use to measure benefit from BIM. And now BIM is getting into digital twins and things like that. Those concepts where you have a digital model of your physical facility, and so that's now you can use that to collect your information for your TCO and things like that. And so I think the challenge, and this is what we're kind of moving into now, Anna Thiemer and I were along with Doug, like I said, we're the people that developed the TCO standard for APA. And I think what we're getting into now is, okay, what do I do first? Because you've got a huge standard. I mean, it's a 2-part standard that talks about principles in the first part and then implementation in the second. But we've identified what needs to be implemented, but at the same time, okay, what do I do to do that? And that's a challenge.
Yeah, so that's an interesting idea there. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, because of the long investment horizon for total cost of ownership, I think the average age of a facility in this country is 50 years. Yeah. Understanding that you can't manage what you don't measure, what kind of measures do we put in place that will help us understand whether we're being effective? Are we really affecting the total cost of ownership, whether we measure that per square foot or per head or per unit of productivity, or how do we put in place metrics that are going to indicate rate of change in our TCO over time?
Well, I think we already probably have those tools in place, and they're work orders, and they're and I think work orders is probably a key element. One of the things we also said with work orders, you can't close your work order until you've updated your BIM, your model, and so just because you've got to keep the model up to date. And this was one of the things, when I was at ARL, we had a guy that was updating the CAD drawings. Well, he had a stack of things that needed to be updated, and so then nobody trusted the information because, it hadn't been updated since the last time that they'd done some kind of modernization to it or something. So you've got, and I say the work order is a good one because typically it permeates throughout the whole organization. I mean, everything that's done to something has a work order, or should anyway. Mm-hmm. And because somebody had to get money to be able to do it and things like that. And so now you're connecting the money to that work order, and you should be able to do some analysis on that and say, if I'm having to replace this piece of equipment every couple of years and it's supposed to last for 10, maybe I should go in and replace the whole piece of equipment or something like that. When one of the other things we did at ARL was we had an infrastructure operations center, and we were monitoring, again, it was the IT side of things, so we were monitoring temperature in each of our spaces that we had equipment. And so we found that actually for $15 we could plug a temperature probe into a UPC uninterruptible power supply, and it would feed back RS-232, it would feed back to our center. So if we found also that if the temperature even goes up a degree or two, that very likely that piece of equipment is getting ready to fail. Mm-hmm. So we would replace the equipment or take it out of service, put a new one in as we tested the other one to see if there was anything really wrong with it, whether it needed to be replaced or not. We had another story where, these are true stories, where the systems in a server room started crashing, and they automatically would notify the system guy that the system had failed. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd get a call to say the system is failing, come in and fix it. And so he'd get out of bed and he'd come in and fix it, to find out that the air conditioning unit had actually failed and the temperature had gone up and everything was kicking off because the temperature was too high. And we had an air conditioning guy on site all the time. So had the air conditioning guy been notified when the temperature had gone up a degree or two, we could have saved all the servers from crashing. And since our role was trying to figure out how to keep the systems up more, improve the uptime for the systems, that's where it was an infrastructure issue to fix that problem. So we came up with a way of, we monitored the temperature in the room. And so if the temperature in the room went up, we'd, be proactive and fix the problem before it caused system problems. So those are the kind of things that, again, going back to your whole collective issue of collecting information, it is holistic. It is big picture. And I think that's, if you approach it that way, you're going to have a much better chance of success in implementing your getting your total picture of what is it costing you to operate this thing? What is the total cost of the ownership? I mean, it's a very descriptive title, and it is the highest level. We're not going to come back with something later and say the really total cost of ownership, or this is it. This is where we need to include everything, and so it's just it's getting realigned and getting the business processes in place to be able to make sure that you're capturing the information, and it is. It's going to change. It's changing your business processes. And I think the other piece is that you can start out small, you can start out slow, and grow into it as long as you understand where you're headed. One of the first steps in TCO is getting a good asset management system in place, and deciding what assets you're going to manage. Mm-hmm. You have so many resources, you can't manage down to every little nut and bolt. So you manage some big things first, some of the really critical issues that are going to put you out of business if they fail, and then just grow into it. I think that was one of the things when the Coast Guard was implementing BIM, and again, everybody, it's the same situation. You have all these existing facilities, and you can't go out and do BIMs on all the existing facilities, all at once. What they did is every time they were doing a renovation project, they did a BIM for that project. And one of the things they found was the facilities that they did the most renovation projects on were their most critical facilities. So within a very few years, they ended up having BIMs for their major facilities on their installations. And what a great way to approach it. You know,
Yep.
You're maybe increasing the cost of each project a little bit, but the point is now you've got a BIM that you can use to operate that facility also. So you, in the long range, again, if you look at the total picture, you're saving money. You know, and that's where I think the thing is that if you're looking at a big enough picture, and again, that's where it's important up at the sea level. You know, where one of the things we were talking about earlier was the whole thing of getting standards in place. And one of the big standards that's being implemented now is ISO 55000, which is asset management. And so that's something that asset management is a C-level, you know, issue. And because they have to figure taxes and all the other things that go along with that. And so, you know, that's probably a good segue into implementing BIM and implementing TCO and implementing a whole life cycle concept as you try to implement ISO 55000. And the other one is ISO 41000, which is facility management. You know, there's a lot of things in there. And that's one of the things in the TCO standard we talked about is what are all the relationships with these different standards. And there's another one, service life, ISO 15686. And then that ties into IFC, the open standards for BIM and things like that. So 16739. So all these things, you know, actually do work together. And that's one of the things that we did the whole appendix in the TCO standard on just what the relationship was of these different ISO standards and even some other standards that tie into that. So so there's I definitely see all the relationships that between these different pieces, and I think that's again, you've got to have that broad thinking and not necessarily just expertise in one area. You know, we've got to create these T-shaped learners, T-shaped practitioners that really have, you know, that depth of knowledge in their area of expertise, but also a knowledge of what's happening across the board. Where does information come from? Who else needs the information that you're creating or you're modifying and improving? You know, one of the mantras is collect data one time and use it and convert it and update it and improve it and things like that for its life. Because almost everything, you know, almost everything that shows up in first cost will be there for the rest of the facility life. You know, obviously there's some things that false work and some of those kind of things don't, but for the most part, you know, it certainly stays with the facility. And even if you have to replace an air conditioning system later on, as I said, you got to have that, you know, design information to be able to make sure that you're getting the right one. And of course, you know, as time passes, and these, you know, the units get more energy efficient. You know, you may be able to use something different. You're not necessarily just going to replace it with the same model, same branded, same model. You hopefully will replace it with something that's better and more efficient or something like that. Now, I'm talking to my air conditioning guy. He said, unfortunately, the air conditioners aren't lasting as long as they used to because they've, you know, designed some some failure into them, but so they don't last too long. But you got those kind of issues too. I mean, that's that's just reality. So you got to be able to figure all those things and really, you know, kind of push whoever you're buying from. You know, what is the life expectancy? How can I get a better, you know, warranty, longer warranty? And I mean, you know, even Sears used to have good, better, best, you know, in different products and things like that. It cost more for the better product, and in some cases that was probably cheaper over the long haul because you didn't have to replace it as often.
So, Deke, one last question for you. Is there anything you are seeing on the horizon that you think is going to be just tremendously impactful for facilities owners and operators that we should be preparing for, we should be thinking about, and getting our organizations ready to take advantage of when they hit?
I think, I mean, historically, reading tea leaves in my mind is kind of like looking at some of the best projects that are out there today. And like I say, I've been fortunate with these Building Smart International Awards to be able to see some of the best products that are out there. And I think that, if we get that information out to more practitioners, that that's really the future, if you will, because we don't want to have just one-off kind of solution successes. We want to have that as being the standard operating procedure. And so I think there's enough innovative stuff out there that that we can take advantage of that for quite a while. And that's probably the best, because that's the best approach, because it's least risk. Somebody's already done it,
Mm-hmm.
and they've gone through it, and they can probably, and more than likely they're willing to tell about it, and they're pretty excited about it, that they were able to pull it off. And so I think that's in fact, one of the things last year, Building Smart International put out a booklet on from their awards, and talked about each of the projects that were winners. And it's a great document, and it goes through and really it'll open your eyes for, I think for a lot of companies, that, wow, people are doing stuff like this, so I think that's, that's probably the best thing. I think, obviously, we're continuing to work to try to get everybody to work together and come up with, more comprehensive solutions, and the software to be able to, better communicate, people to better communicate, and things like metadata and some of those things, and building trust. And so some of those, there's project examples that we can look at, but there's also high performance team examples also. I know we were working with, it was the College of Cinematic Arts at USC, and we went to several of the review projects and at the end of the whole, at the exit interview, if you will, the team that built that, designed and built that, was really kind of lamenting over the fact that they developed this high performance team that was really doing some great stuff together, and they were all working together and integrated and everything like that. And they were lamenting the fact that the project was over, and they were going to have to start the next project and essentially start from scratch, rebuilding another team. And I think that's that's part of the whole reason of looking at education and trying to, how do we develop BIM talent that that can come out and start start running when they hit the ground. And I think that people have to understand what has been accomplished so that they know that that's the starting point now. I mean, you're watching the Olympics, okay? My favorite person in the world, like Katie Ledecky. I mean, she is so far ahead of everybody in most in long distance races, that's the goal, and people know that, yes, actually a human can go that fast. Or, Caleb Dressel, same thing. A human can actually go that fast. That just sets the bar, and everybody keeps going faster and faster. I mean, every Olympics, every race, somebody breaks a new world record or whatever, and that's kind of the same thing that we're looking at here too. And I think that one of the other examples I use is that it's teamwork, and there's multiple kinds of teams. Swim team is one thing where it is actually personal. Personal times and things like that. Yes, you're on a team and you score and things like that. That happens. But if you're on a volleyball team, my son coaches volleyball for University of Buffalo, and every person has to know what their job is. They have to be in the right place at the right time, And so, you get your service receive, you bump it to the setter hits it up for the pins can hit, and that's, if one of those people is off that day, or they're not, trained properly and things like that, the whole team falls apart. You lose the point, you lose the whole game. And I think that's really the mindset that we have to have, is that kind of a team, not the individual team. I think we're very much individual team oriented. You can have a really, really great structural engineer, and your mechanical engineer doesn't know what he's doing, and the whole thing is going to not end up being as successful as you want it to be. And so everybody's got to be trained up to the same level, and work as that team, and be able to communicate and share information, and that gets into subcontractors and stuff like that and everything too. It's not just the big players, and it's not just the big BIM software either. I mean, there's 100 pieces of software that are used on any project, and they all have to tie in at some level, and be able to share, and we're getting there. It's getting better every year. And if you look at the software that has been tested with IFCs and stuff like that, they're doing a much better job of testing it, number one. But it's looking at, and there's hundreds of packages out now that have been validated, and so those are the kind of things that need to continue happening. So there's a lot of work. I mean, I'm not minimizing the amount of work, but I don't know there's no magic bullet out there. It's things that we already know the answer probably in a lot of them, and we just have to get people out there and like say that the BIM manager that can manage a mega project didn't just walk out of school yesterday. They had to continually improve, and they had to go out and find additional learning that they could build on what they knew, and whether that comes from other examples, or whether it comes from moving around to different companies, or whether is actually going out and getting some additional education from a college or university, or from another organization providing that training is key.
Speaking of sharing, I'm really grateful to you for being willing to share your experience and your perspective with us. It's great to hear. I look forward to reading more as you publish more, and hearing about the advances in how you're defining and describing the total cost of ownership work, as I think it's really important.
Well, my pleasure, and I appreciate your effort. And we've known each other for quite a few years. I wouldn't go back to that. And I appreciate all your efforts, and thank you for having me today. And hopefully it was helpful to some people.
Thanks, Deke. Have a great day.
Take care. Thank you.